So Jim McNett and I, Jim is over here, have had the opportunity to look at some of the building structures associated with the Priest Rapids project. And today we have, our presentation is entitled Wanapum Village and the Tourist Center, Architectural Expressions of the Grant County PUD Coming of Age in the Modern Era. The Tourist Center is known to most of you as the Heritage Center. But the historical name in the early day was the Tourist Center, and so that's what we'll use throughout the presentation. And the Wanapum Village, as Rex was saying, was an employee housing area for the PUD and also included a school. Thank you. Maybe I'll do it, yeah, thanks. So this next slide shows the overall Priest Rapids project. The two dams, Priest Rapids Dam to the south and 17 miles to the north is Wanapum Dam. If you look at this slide, you can see the dates of construction of the two dams. Priest Rapids started construction in 1956 and went through 61, and Wanapum was from 59 to 61. So there was a tremendous amount of construction that was going on in this area at that time. The red arrows show the location of the Tourist Center and the Wanapum Village. The Tourist Center is within the Wanapum Dam complex. It's directly east of the dam, and you all know where the Wanapum Village is, where we are right now. So with the completion of the two-dam Priest Rapids project in 1964, the PUD became the third largest non-federal power producer in the country. Responding to the growing public presence, Grant County PUD designed the Wanapum Village and the Tourist Center based on current architectural trends, and in the case of the Tourist Center, spared no expense to construct a state-of-the-art facility. So the next few slides give an overview of the rapid growth of the PUD as an organization. Beginning in the early 1900s, federal and private power interests were interested in developing the 1,200-mile-long Columbia River for its power potential. In 1908, the Hanford Irrigation and Development Company built the first hydroelectric project on the Columbia River, which is what you see here in this photograph. It was located at Priest Rapids, and so this photograph is from 1956, right before the Priest Rapids Dam was constructed, so right before its demolition. In 1992, enthusiasm for damming the Columbia came from the Federal 308 report, which investigated improving the river for its navigation, power, flood control, and irrigation purposes. There were 10 different sites identified for dam development, and Priest Rapids was one of those. In 1930, Washington passed legislation enabling the creation of the public utility districts to provide consumer-owned electrical distribution systems to underserved rural areas. So in 1938, the Grange petitioned voters to create a countywide PUD known as Grant County PUD number 2. In 1930, right after the initial legislation was passed, there was a Moses Lake precinct that was the PUD number 1 of Grant County, so that's where the number 2 comes from. By 1945, the PUD had purchased the Washington Water Power facilities and moved from Soap Lake to Ephrata. And at that time, the PUD had about 2,500 customers. But it had limited influence because it had no generating facilities. In the post-World War II period, there was rapid growth throughout the state, but particularly in the Columbia Basin. The Columbia Basin Irrigation Project opened large blocks of arid land to farming. And in 1948, in 1948 this occurred. So between 1950 and 1960, the Grant County population rose from around 23,000 to 46,000. In the post-World War II, power needs increased due to the growing population and the rise in the use of household electricity for appliances, as well as industrial uses. This image off to the right is from the 1960 annual report for the PUD. And there you can see a homemaker surrounded by electrical appliances. The PUD would hold the equivalent of Tupperware parties where they would have a representative from the PUD explain how new electrical appliances could kind of improve your life. This need for more power led the small PUD to pursue purchasing the Priest Rapids site to build a hydroelectric dam. The federal government dominated dam building on the Columbia River with the construction of the Grand Coulee, Chief Joseph, and McNary dams. And even in 1950, they had authorized the construction of a dam at Priest Rapids, but they never authorized the funding for it. The tide turned, and after years of a Democratic-led government, the inauguration of a Republican President, Eisenhower, in 1953, resulted in a policy of no new federal hydroelectric projects. These circumstances led the PUD to filing a preliminary permit with the Federal Power Commission to build the Priest Rapids project in 1952. So the PUD hired Harza engineers. They were renowned river consulting engineers to design the project. They first considered one high dam, but they opted for two dams, which improved financing options and fish passage while also getting power online quicker and protecting against potential flooding of the Hanford power plant nuclear plant downstream. In 1955, the Federal Power Commission granted the PUD a license to build a two-dam project, which they did under a joint venture with public agencies and non-federal utilities. The PUD used the same joint venture approach to finance the construction of the Wanapum Dam. The PUD grew from a small utility district with only a transmission system to the third largest non-federal power producer in the country. The two-dam Priest Rapids project reflects the ingenuity of a small local public utility district to complete a massive hydroelectric project that shaped the local economy by providing low-cost power for agricultural, industrial, commercial, and residential use. In the midst of this rapid growth, the PUD clamored first to build the dams, then to create permanent housing for employees in a remote area, and finally construct a tourist center, a place from which the public could view the project. Now these images on the bottom here show exactly what the PUD was up to. You have first the construction of the Priest Rapids Dam, then comes Wanapum, next is the Wanapum Village, and finally the tourist center. So now we'll get into some details about the Wanapum Village. In this remote area, the PUD offered skilled jobs with a good salary, and the utility knew it would be difficult to attract employees without quality housing. Having employees live near the dams also ensured that there were operators there in case of emergency. The first permanent employees to move in were the operators for the Priest Rapids Dam, and then after the Wanapum Dam was done, employees working for that dam moved in as well. So Wanapum Village reflects the PUD's optimism in response to the booming growth it experienced in the previous decades. This community was established when post-war trends like rising population, low-density urbanization, increased automobile ownership, and improved roadways contributed to how communities developed. The Wanapum Village houses were all constructed in 19 and share the same ranch architectural style, which offered a family-friendly design and low-cost construction. Designed for future growth, the neighborhood also incorporated lots for 30 more houses that were never added. And if you look at this site plan, you can see near the road, there's a lighter rectangular boxes that show where the additional units were, or lots were planned. So in the 20th century, large-scale irrigation and hydroelectric projects transformed the Columbia Basin. And in this, what was then very rural and, area, they needed to provide housing for their employees. So some other examples of utilities that did this sort of thing, the Bureau of Reclamation provided housing for the folks maintaining their irrigation canals. So you have in the upper photograph some of this sort of housing at Moses Lake. And then at Grand Coulee, there were engineer housing, which is shown in the lower photograph. Wanapum exhibits a later, more modern example of this type of employee housing. The quarter assignment regulations outlined specific criteria as to which families and individuals were assigned to the different house types. Similar to the approach at the nearby government employee town of Hanford, a family's makeup and the rank of the employee determined the type of house that they would receive. The basic criteria considered whether a family had children, a live-in housekeeper, a dependent adult, as well as individual salary and longevity of employment. Jim, this is
So I'm going to discuss the more nuts and bolts part of this, and I'll go through the structures and a bit about the architect, and we'll zoom in on a few details and tell you why this project is, in many ways, kind of a unique survivor. The architect, Dan Hollenberry, was a Washington state architect who practiced mostly in central and eastern Washington. And this project was actually one of his most noted projects. And he died just a few years ago. He evidently was the son of a famous football coach at WSU, and there's a stadium named after him. And he, as an architect, he happened to come of age during the war, so back and forth grabbing architectural courses when he could, when he wasn't, while he was serving in the Navy. And afterwards, he came out of architecture school at a great time when the country was rebuilding like crazy, and he worked on many projects in eastern Washington. Oh. So this, one of the best features of this Wanapum village is the plan, which is a very tidy and economical plan, and yet it creates a very distinct neighborhood in an easy way. What he did was create a loop, and in the middle of the loop was a landscaped area which would serve all the families, and by creating the loop he minimized the range of utilities you would have to have. So all the power for the whole project is all underground and around the perimeter. And then all the houses essentially are very closely related to the central common space. The Wanapum village was built using the so-called ranch-style houses. They were used for many reasons, but mostly because they were stylish, they were inexpensive, and you could build them up very quickly. The style incorporated different things that you can see here, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Things like pretty low sloped roofs, large windows. You can see that picture window. A lot of importance given to the car for the first time. You had carports and garages that were facing the street. It had aluminum windows, which were also used throughout. And the design was kind of picked up a little bit or made somewhat interesting by the fact that they were asymmetrical compared to traditional like colonial style or other styles. And the plans could be simple L shapes and flipped and to give added interest. So these are some details which I'm sure you will probably recognize in your own lives. These things happen, but the unique part of this village is, because it was always owned by the GCPUD, the ownership has never changed, and there's never been a big willingness to remodel or change things, except when they just flat out needed it. So in these units, you'll see things that are virtually unchanged from the day they were first opened. So things like this formica with this kind of boomerang pattern, these are all throughout these units. These cabinets, or you can see this is a picture of the day it opened, they're exactly the same cabinets. These long, kind of obscure glass panels are typical of ranch style, and they're found throughout the project. And different sort of facade treatments with different brick styles, different boards, horizontal, diagonal. These are all elements of the ranch style. The complex consists of 30 different houses, and there's 6 different types. When you boil it down, there are really 3 types, and each one of those types has an underground basement, a complete basement, to make it another type. So there's 6 types altogether, but reality-wise, as far as their footprint on the ground, there are only 3 types. And what the architect did was flip them back and forth, change the facade materials a little bit, and that would be what makes the difference within the neighborhood. So these are, I'm going to go through these quickly. So these are different plans. Any house that received a full basement would have a carport. So that's how you can tell if a house has a full basement or not. Also, the first 2 houses, A and B, these 2, are smaller in square footage, and there are only 2 bedrooms. By the time you get to B, C, D, and E, C, D, E, and F, those are all 3 bedrooms and get larger. These are the last 3. The largest house will be the F style, which included, that's a full basement, and so that would have a carport, which you see here. Okay, here you go.
We just have a couple more of these transfers here. So next we'll talk a little bit about Wanapum Village, or the Wanapum Elementary School. During the construction of the dams, there was an influx of laborers that took its toll on all of the local school districts. At Priest Rapids, the PUD had built a school in Mattawa that after the Priest Rapids Dam was done, they sold that to the Walook School District. While the PUD constructed Wanapum Dam, it explored contributing to the nearby Kittitas County program, where schools were just bursting at the seams due to the large number of dam workers working on Wanapum. But the PUD could not use bond funds outside of the county. And so the PUD created an agreement with the local Crabs Creek School District that as rapidly as feasible and practicable, it would build a 6-room elementary school with a multi-purpose room, which is what we're in right now. Again, here is the plan of Wanapum Village, and you can see where the elementary school is located and highlighted. The PUD established a unique year lease with the school district, whereby the school paid monthly $10 per child, but only for children of parents who were not working for the PUD or building the dam. The project contract demanded construction completed under a tight timeline and could be canceled if it was not completed by September 1st, 1960, when the school was to open. The school opened in 1960 and with about 100 students in the 1st through the 8th grades. The following year, a junior high school had been built in Red Rock, and the 7th and 8th graders were then bused there. Dam laborers moved away and class sizes shrunk. To accommodate the lower numbers of students, the school combined 2 grades. So they would have the first and the second, the third and fourth, and the fifth and the sixth, each with 1 teacher. In 1963, only 53 students attended the Wanapum Elementary School, and by the beginning of 1964, that number dropped to 47. So the Board of Education decided to close the school until it was economically feasible to reopen, but it never did reopen. So the school was only open for 4 years. The school remained vacant over the years, and there was occasional use for meetings and potlucks. After a fire in 1963, or 1983, the PUD remodeled the school for its engineering department offices.
So this school was designed by Hovind, Hawthorne, that should be Harthrne, and Smith, Seattle architects, and they also designed the tourist center. We don't know that much about them. However, they had done some other work in this part of Washington State, and they had also done schools in Western Washington. This particular design is an excellent example of kind of the birth of Northwest style architecture, and it was exactly current thinking. It was the epitome of current thinking in school design at the time. So the things that were stressed, which you could say are part of Northwest architecture, the relationship between the inside and the outside, a very regular structure that has lumber implications, and you'll see all these glulam beams on a regular grid throughout the building. Deep overhangs for walkways to protect people along the perimeter, as well as provide sun control for the glazing. And the other characteristic that's quite important is slightly sloped flat roofs. So all these elements, plus the materials which were typical of the day, are shown in the original school building. If you look at the plans, everything is laid out very regularly on a module. And these are the original classroom clusters, 2 each. So there were 6 classrooms altogether. And on one plan, we saw a drawing that showed another cluster for 2 extra classrooms for expansion. This is where we are now, and these are the administrative center activities and a library, et cetera. And they're on the same module as the classroom buildings. The idea was to have open connections with a courtyard in between, and the original building was a handsome building by just about any standard. What happened was, after the building was reconfigured, it had a totally different program, which called for, it was very difficult for the original building to stay as it was and accommodate the program of essentially an office building. So a local architect was hired to change the building, and he certainly did that, and it was in the era of postmodernism. So you have kind of a throwback to the gable roofs, which now house the mechanical equipment. All the overhangs were mostly gotten rid of, and the glazing was changed because it wasn't needed for typical office space. Also, the openness of the plans for classrooms and so on was no longer necessary because you wanted different discrete offices within the space.
So Wanapum Village represents the PUD's coming of age when the completion of its second hydroelectric dam required establishing a permanent base for its operating staff. In a flurry of activity, the PUD completed both the Wanapum Village and the school in 1960. The PUD created a planned community complete with a park, an elementary school. Such planned residential communities are uncommon in rural central Washington because they require a substantial funding base. Wanapum Village provides the amenities of a mid-century suburban neighborhood, including curvilinear streets separated from the major roadway, sidewalks, a common green space, and good quality ranch style houses that offered a variety of plans and different material accents. Surrounded by desert, this green oasis with its unified modern aesthetic is an anomaly in the area and a unique example of utility-owned employee housing. So next, we'll talk a little bit about the Tourist Center, or Heritage Center, as you may know it. The original plan for the Wanapum development included the roadside picnic area in place today, but it did not include the Tourist Center. So this photograph shows the location of the Tourist Center before it was constructed, and then the location of the park that is there today, but also not yet developed in that photo. Soon after completion of the dam, visitors to the park reportedly wandered aimlessly around the dam, causing the consternation with Grant County PUD manager Everett Gibbons, who tasked the public relation officer at the time, Jack Park, with guiding the development of a tourist center. Part of our research included interviewing Jack Park, which was just wonderful. You know, he had so many stories about just what was going on at the time. The final location was located on a narrow strip near the entrance to the dam, which allowed tourists to get near the dam, but it kept them away from the entry point. According to Jack Park, the conceptual design of the tourist center came from the PUD employee named Max Folsom. Park recalled that Folsom was the most natural architect and designer in the world. He had no formal schooling, but designed everything for the PUD. Some of his projects included the Wanapum and Priest Rapids entrance signs and the petroglyph monument at Priest Rapids. So you can see the two signs there incorporate many local motifs. There are petroglyph designs, and they use local stone set in concrete. And the center image there is the petroglyph monument outside of Priest Rapids Dam. Folsom's design was provided to the architects who were the same architects that had worked on the school. And they drew up the building and sited and finished it to be compatible with the local landscape.
So of all the buildings and pieces of this project, besides the two dams, we feel this tourist center is an exceptional building. And it's one of those things where everything kind of came together. The site was perfect. The builder was great. The architect was inspired, and it had local input that made this pretty much everything a building could be for a small 5,000 or 6,000 square foot building. At the time this was done, the most influential architect in the United States was a man called Louis Kahn, who had kind of pioneered the use of concrete as a beautiful building material. And so the architect had the reference point of the dam right, a few hundred yards away, which is in its own way a very beautiful concrete structure as well. So they went with making this building a cast-in-place concrete building. The picture here, this is the Yale Art Gallery, which was hugely important to architects exactly at this time. And this is the roof of the tourist center. What this deep structure does is give you very large open spans. So when you go into the tourist center, it's just all one big open space. And it's a beautifully made roof too. The other influences, these are all from this Louis Kahn, and architects would mimic and copy his ideas as much as they could, gracefully. The idea of squares, interlocking squares, was part of Louis Kahn's designs, and he did a whole building called the Richards Medical Center, which had a group of squares. This isn't the plan for it, but it's almost, if you took this piece, it would be identical to the plan. These are the plans that were provided by Hovind, And you can see there's one, the major square, then this is kind of the support square, which is toilets, and then another square in here, which is a covered area. And the whole building is very rigorous. It's all laid out on a 6-foot grid in both directions. And that grid carries through the sidewalk, through the paving outside, and the green space and fountain on the other side. In the con building, you see these inserted, this would be the structure, and then he inserted different sorts of panels within the structure. The same thing happens on the tourist center. This is a picture of the building under construction, and it looks, you wouldn't know it wasn't a dam under construction when you see this. So you see all the vertical fins, the heavy rebars. I don't know if you can see, it's slightly battered. It's perfectly sited to refer to the dam, which is right nearby. So this builder deserves a lot of credit for the quality of this building and pulling it off. The material is essentially, it's all permanent, heavy-duty materials, and concrete is number one. And this is kind of a virtuoso concrete performance of cast in place, precast, any kind of concrete you can think of. There are a lot of interesting details that are well executed, and even something like the floor surfaces, so this would be the exterior. Once you get to the overhang or a change in elevation, these tiles were inserted. This shows a precast panel that is put into place, and it has local rock as kind of a material embedded in it. This building, for such a small building, is filled with great details. This is a handrail, some more concrete panels behind. Even the benches, and these benches show up in other parts of the project, were custom designed for this particular building. The local part of the building included artisans such as painters and sculptors who were from this area and who had done other projects on the two dams. This use of these motifs was present here. This is shown as it is today, and here it is when the painting is being done by Edward Quigley, who's doing this large painting there. And you can see, even though you have the tile, you have wood, and these inlaid things, it all hangs together. Maybe the module helps in the size of the space. So the outside of the building, this is the dam. You can see these vertical things being referred to in the structure. This is the outdoor courtyard, and the sculptor, local Click Relander, did this sculpture, and it's every bit it's effective today as it was when it was put in. So the whole building is pretty much an unusually good building. And the new building, you can only hope, will try and maintain this standard of structure. So from our point of view, the tourist center is an unusually intact modern building. You can call it the brutalist style, which is more from a French word, which just means concrete, raw concrete, rather than brutal. And it expresses everything that the Grant County PUD is about, I think. It's a public building, it refers to the river and the power plant, and it's local. It's quite a beautiful building.